Hello Cloud Pedagogians, welcome to the lab session. In the previous lab, we have configured basic things that are required to set up a team for the code commit access. Imagine that right now your project is located in your local system and you want to migrate that to your newly created code commit repo. So in this lab, we are going to take a look at repository actions that are required to transfer our local repository into code commit. And we will also do this both from management console and the AWS CLI. If you are ready, let's go ahead with the task. In the task 1, we are going to generate and configure AWS and Git credentials. In task 2, we are going to create a code commit repository. In task 3, we are going to migrate the student directory application which is actually located in the local system. Finally, in the task 4, we are going to verify the files that are migrated. So let's start with the task 1. Generate and configure AWS and Git credentials. In this task, we are going to create AWS access and secret types. AWS provides multiple types of security credentials depending on how you wish to access the cloud account. As you know, a username and password are required to use the AWS management console, whereas access credentials are used to perform programmatic calls to AWS. It means that when you want to access via the API, CLI or SDK, then you need these credentials. We are certainly going to do that. So sign into the AWS management console and open the IAM dashboard. In the IAM, in the navigation pane, choose users and then choose the IAM user you want to configure for code commit access. Next, we need to authenticate the AWS CLI with AWS short-term credentials. So click on the security credential tab here. Under the access keys section, click create access key button. Select CLI as the use case, accept the confirmation and then click next. Enter tag accordingly if needed. I'm going to skip this right now and click create access key. Copy the credentials in a notepad or download it. Click done so that you can view the access keys details in the user credentials tab. Let me open my local terminal and then configure the AWS credentials. I'm not going to explain all these details in depth because we have already covered these things in fundamental course. Enter the AWS configure command. Enter the access key and then enter the secret key. Enter the region you want to configure these credentials. Finally, enter the type of JSON input. So that's good. We have configured AWS credentials. Next thing is create Git credentials for HTTPS connections to code commit. In the same security credentials tab and in the HTTP Git credentials for AWS code commit section, choose the generate credentials button. Copy the username and password in a notepad that IAM generated for you, or by choosing download credentials to download this information as a .csv file. You need this information to connect to the code commit. Just remember, this is the only chance to save the username and password. If you don't save them, you can copy the username from the IAM console, but you cannot look up for the password. You must reset the password and then save it. After you have saved your credentials, choose close. After download the file, you can view the username under HTTP Git credentials for AWS code commit. Good job. We have successfully configured access and secret keys and also generated Git credentials for code commit. In task 2, we are going to create a code commit repository. So in this task, we use the code commit console to create the code commit repository. Let's take a look at the code commit in the console by typing in the search bar. In the region selector, choose again the AWS region where you want to create the repository. Since our student directory application server is in North Virginia region, your repository is going to be in the same region. So let's just keep everything in the same region. On the repository page, choose create repository. On the create repository page, in the repository name, enter a name for the repository. Here, student app is the folder name that I have in my local directory, so I'm just entering the same thing. Good job. Our student directory application empty repo is created in code commit. Now you can do a git clone and get the code into your development environment or in your local system. From now on, you can securely interact with the repository hosted in CodeCommit. In the task 3, we are going to migrate local content to the CodeCommit repository. Now that you have a CodeCommit repository, you can choose a student directory application on your local computer to convert into a local Git repository. So, the git init command can be used to either convert existing unversioned content to the Git repository, or if you do not yet have the files or content, to initialize a new and empty directory. Since we have the files already, not to worry. Right now my code is in the Git repository, so let me get it to my local computer and then we will push it to the code commit. Unzip the folder and then from the terminal or command line on your local computer, change the directory to the directory you want to use as the source from your repository. So enter cd student app. Run this command to set your default branch name to main for all newly created repository. So enter git config global init default branch is main. Next, run the git init command to initialize the git version control in the directory. This creates a .git subdirectory in the root of the directory that enables version control tracking. The .git folder also contains all of the required metadata for the repository. Next thing is, let's check the status of the initialized directory by running the git status command. And then add the files you want to add to the version control. In our case, we run the git add command with the dot specifier to add all of the student directory application files in this directory. Now create a commit for the added files with the commit message. But before you can issue a commit in Git, the username and user email properties must be set. Just supply your own name and email address and Git commits will no longer be a problem. So first let me configure with my email. Good. Next I'm going to configure with the username as a Cloud Pedagogy. Next we will use git commit to create a snapshot of the staged changes along a timeline of a Git project's history. So git commit initial commit. Finally, run the git push command specifying the URL and the name of the destination code commit repository. Since I am adding all the files to the repository, I am giving option as all. Copy the repository URL from the management page and add to the git push command. Enter the username and password which you have downloaded for the code commit. Good job! You have successfully migrated your files from your local system to CodeCommit repository. In the final step, we are going to view the files which are created in CodeCommit. So, after you have pushed the contents of your directory, you can use the CodeCommit console to quickly view all of the files in the repository. So, let's open the console and see. Right now, we don't have any files in this repository. I'm going to refresh the page. As you can see, all the files are added from the console to CodeCommit repository. You can use the AWS CodeCommit console to browse the history of commits in a repository. Basically, this can help you identify changes made in a repository, like when and by whom the changes were made, when specific commits were merged into a branch. For example, if you see here, Cloud Pedagogy is the committer. Congratulations! Now you know how to migrate your local application code into CodeCommit repository. Thanks for your time and see you again in my next session. Until then, take care and have fun in learning.